Right, all right. Looks like we're at 12:01 for those of us in Pacific Standard Time. Hello and welcome to DUPR's first ever myth-busting live webinar. I'm nervous, but I'm ready. My name is Jillian Braverman. I'm a former professional pickleball player, and I've spent the past 4 years in racket sport ratings and technology. I am currently CEO of DUPR, joined today by DUPR's data scientist, Mike Forzley, who will come on video shortly. It's not fair that Mike got both the brains and the beauty. He's definitely the smarter person in my half of the Zoom room, but hey, my DUPR's higher, so at least I have that. In all seriousness, we are very excited to be here today to field questions from our community as DUPR more and more becomes the standard and the leader in pickleball ratings, data, and analytics, not just here in the US, but at over 400 clubs, leagues, and associations across 15 different countries, including the official rating of 9 different international governing bodies. With that comes a heavy responsibility of making sure that we are evolving with the demands, the questions, the needs of our community, of you. What do you deserve as a player and as an organizer? You deserve ratings that are transparent. You deserve ratings that are easy to understand, that are accurate, that are fair. You deserve club and event technology that is accessible, that's affordable, that encourages and enables innovation in formats, and most importantly, that's integrated with a rating that can provide the optimal player experience and optimal revenue per court per hour. It's easy to sometimes feel that a rating is a black box. It is an algorithmic expression of skill, that there's no art whatsoever that goes into it, nor is there a large team of 8 people, human beings, who are working tirelessly in data analytics, data engineering, data aggregation on our team. Our job all day long is to think about how to make the rating and our systems better, and how to evolve to meet the needs of our growing community. So at times it's poetic that something so objective can elicit such strong subjective emotions, which is why we're here today to do some myth busting. Are we perfect as a company? Absolutely not. Do we have a long way to go as a rating system and as a technology business? Absolutely. All we can do is try to be better every day. And a huge part of that is being here today with you to not just answer your questions, but for us to also listen. So with that said, let's get to our very first question, and please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom. So you will be off video and you will be mute. However, you can chat questions. I will try and keep up with them and we'll answer them live. If we cannot, I promise we'll try and get to them at the end. We have 15 minutes set aside for Q&A. Worst case scenario, we will email you answers to your questions. And as a reminder, we have 3 lucky participants' player charts that we will be analyzing on this call towards the end. So Mike, the first question from our community is DUPR as predictive across the entire player population, i.e. gender versus gender or old versus young? I know this is one we get a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I'm going to share my screen and we'll look at our predictive ability across demographics. So like Jill said, my name's Mike. I run ratings at DUPR. So my job basically is to just think about, live and breathe ratings. So I spend all day, every day working in this program that you can see on my screen now, which is a program called R. And R is just a coding program that's used to analyze and manipulate clean data. So today, as we move through these questions, I'm going to do as much as I can to answer all of these questions in R, working directly with our DUPR results data, our DUPR ratings, just as I would when I look specifically at these same things on a daily basis at work. So predictive power, or the predictive ability of DUPR, is something that every time we run ratings, I look at right away. So we're really interested in knowing whether DUPR is good at predicting win-loss, predicting sort of the percentage of points scored by players based on their ratings, It's just a measure that I'm consistently or constantly thinking about to sort of assess the ratings and assess the current algorithm. So Jill's question about DUPR predictiveness across demographics, to answer that question, we're actually just going to look at some figures that I've made using our DUPR results data and using the current iteration of the DUPR ratings for every single player in our system. So this first figure that you can see on the right, this y-axis represents basically our predictive power, or the predictive ability of DUPR ratings in every single match in all 350,000 rows of our results data. The ability of those ratings and the relative ratings of the players in those matches to correctly predict the outcome of a match. And what we're looking at in this specific figure is just player age, or the player who owns the result. And the important takeaway from this figure is the predictive ability of DUPR across player ages all the way from 9 to 97 is basically a flat line. So this figure is boring, but we honestly want it to be boring, because if we were seeing wild swings or positive and negative trends in the predictive ability of DUPR across player ages, that would be problematic. We can also look at age in a different way. So this is the same figure with the DUPR predictive ability on the y-axis, and then the age range in every single match in our entire results data on the x-axis. So 60 would be a difference of 60 years between the oldest player in the match and the youngest player in the match. And 0 would mean everybody in the match is the exact same age. And again, what we see is a mostly boring figure. There's a slight, extremely slight positive trend, but our predictive ability is pretty consistent and almost the same across the entirety of match age range. Another one, just to really drive the point home, again, the same figure, DUPR predictive ability on the y-axis, and then the average age of match participants. And again, it's just a flat line, a boring figure, no positive or negative trends, which ultimately is a good thing because it means that our DUPR ratings are what is predicting the outcome of the match, not the ages of the players involved in the match. And I look at this sort of predictive power or predictive ability across all sorts of different categories on a daily or on a weekly basis. So this figure just shows the ability of DUPR to correctly predict the outcome of matches in matches where seniors play non-seniors and matches where seniors play seniors. So again, we want the DUPR rating to be driving prediction. And we want to make sure that seniors are rated on the same scale as non-seniors. And a great way to look at that is to look at these matches where seniors are playing non-seniors and compare our predictive power to matches where seniors are playing seniors. And just a couple more here. We can also look at the same thing in non-pro versus non-pro matches and pro versus pro matches, or even in men's mixed versus women's matches. And really, it's just like our predictive ability, our ability to predict the win-loss outcome of a match, or even the percentage of points scored by each team in a match. It's consistently just this flat, boring relationship, which is really what we want to see. We want to see the ratings driving our predictive power and not the demographics. So before we move on to the next question, I think I'll have Jill look and see if there's any questions related to this topic.
There are no questions related specifically to this topic. However, there are a lot of questions, so I'll apologize. Oh, here is one. Thank you. An anonymous attendee. Is that your real name? Just kidding. What is the metric and scale of the predictive ability? Without any numbers, there is no way to know how predictive it is. Could it literally be a coin flip?
So yeah, that's a great question. This is like the delta in our predictive ability. So these come from a model. So I'm basically modeling the relationship between DUPR and whatever outcome I'm interested in. I take that response variable and then I assess that response variable, or the difference in that predicted response variable across these demographics groups. So the point here is just to show basically the variation. And and not the actual like point estimates for predictive power or predictive ability.
I think this leads really nicely into a question we get quite a bit, Mike, is do DUPR tournaments have to be run universally, i.e. no age, no gender, because DUPR is a universal system. That means we don't have ratings for men or women. We just have a singles rating and a doubles rating, regardless of your age, gender, or geography. And the answer is no. Just because you're using a universal rating to run your tournament doesn't mean you necessarily have to run your bracketing universally. So no age, no gender. A perfect example of this is the waterfall, this transformative amateur event that's happening in just a couple days in Newport Beach. It's guaranteeing 4 matches in 4 hours for players. There is an open division where there's a 50-year-old man playing with his 10-year-old son, and they'll be playing against 2 women in their first round. But there's also gender doubles, and there's also senior bracketing. So just to answer that question, no, you don't have to run your events without age or gender. Mike, one question that is showing up in the chat that we had multiple people write in about, and I know that we get quite a bit, is does playing a not rated or a lower player always hurt me, or does it hurt me?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Like you said, it's something we get asked a lot and something I look at a lot. So I'm just going to bring up another figure here in R. What I'm doing here is I'm randomly sampling our results data to collect 10,000 random results from the entirety of our results data. And then I'm just using that to create these 2 figures that are going to pop up here. And one sec, just takes a second to render. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this top figure really closely because these are a really good data-driven way to answer these questions. So this y-axis, this represents sort of what we call match-specific performance values. This specific axis, there's a black line that basically represents a performance for a player exactly as expected and exactly at their rating. A point above the line represents a performance where a player performed higher than expected or higher than we expected them given their rating. And a point below the line represents a result where a player performed lower than expected given their rating. So this is points per expected. Every single point is a random result from our database. And what I really just want to show here is in this top panel, we're just randomly selecting these data from our results database, and then we're plotting them against teammate rating. And what we're looking at here is basically a flat relationship between the performance of players versus the expectation that we set for them based on their rating and the rating of their teammate. And it's essentially a flat relationship. The different colors in the points just represent men's, women's, and mixed. But the point here is if we were seeing this like strong positive skewing relationship or a strong negative relationship, or even differences by color in the points and different relationships by color, that would be indication that your teammate's rating is directly affecting your DUPR rating and directly affecting how we grade you in each match. The bottom figure is the same exact figure, except it's opponent rating on the x-axis. And again, what we see is this mostly flat relationship from these 10,000 randomly sampled points in our data set. And we're not seeing any trends that suggest that your opponent's rating is directly affected or directly influencing how we grade you in each match. So this is something that I look at all the time, again, just to make sure that that specific question, is playing a lower rated player. Does that influence your rating, et cetera? And we can just go in our data and look specifically at these things. Any questions on that topic? Yep.
We have quite a few questions. I think anonymous attendee, if you are looking for a job in data science with DUPR, ping me after this. Loving all of your questions. I see a lot of questions around data. How do you have my tournament results if I haven't input them directly into DUPR? How do you aggregate data? So we work with over 20 different data sources that either submit results to us or we aggregate data from key sites. We also are building not just a one-way, but a two-way API. Caesar, I believe you had asked a question about that. So again, you're more than, I'd be more than happy to chat with you about that, or my team would after the call. And then it looks like we have some questions around how is team rating determined? Is it still skewed to the lesser rated player? Is that something that we feel we could address now, Mike?
Yeah, teammate rating, basically we're just, so when that's really used just to like sort of assign the difference between the ratings of two doubles teams. So it's just sort of a somewhat weighted average of the ratings in players or of players on both teams. And then there is an effort in the algorithm to sort of decouple the relative influence of each player on the outcome of the match. So it's not necessarily always skewed towards the lower rated player. It's kind of like a changing proportional attribution to each player based on the ratings of everybody involved. So it's not like a fixed ratio that we do, but there are certainly like code written in the algorithm to try to decouple, because we know that a higher rated opponent and a lower rated opponent are not contributing in the exact same way to the outcome of the match.
And we have a question here about how predictive is DUPR compared to other rating systems, if we have any data on that. I can only speak from my personal experience, having worked at the preeminent rating company in tennis called Universal Tennis. Many people know it by UTR. That although it's been about a year since I was there, our rating right now is as predictive as the UTR algorithm, the standard in tennis. I can't speak for what they've done within the year. As I said, I haven't been employed there, but we're very proud of the predictive power and the ability, and we're constantly pushing it to its limits, testing it. Mike and I just chatted yesterday about implementing a few tweaks that could maybe, up it 0.5%. We're talking about really fine margins here, but to us, being able to grab a 0.5% more in predictiveness would be huge. I see here a question about WPR and UTPR. World Pickleball Rating and UTPR have separate ratings for gender doubles and mixed doubles. DUPR, by contrast, has just one doubles rating. Why and what are the implications of this? So, Jesse, we have to build a rating system for the future. You can't build a rating system for 10, 15, 25 years ago. So what Universal Tennis has done such a good job of is set the standard for universal ratings, meaning no age, no gender. It's so much easier for a consumer to keep up with, oh, I have one doubles rating. I don't have a verified rating, an unverified, a mixed rating, a gender doubles rating, and then every subset therein. So for clarity of purpose in the mind of the everyday user, it's just easier. Why don't more entities adopt this or do this? Frankly, it's really difficult. It's really, really hard. That's why. So we've cracked that code. We're proud of having cracked that code. And we're going to keep plugging. So Mike, let's move on to our next question, which I think is pretty similar or goes along nicely with the question you just answered about the impact of playing a not rated or a lower rated player. Charlie Bradford wrote in, if you are a 3-5 and don't play against any 4-0s, can you get to a 4-0? If 4-0s only play against each other, then will their ratings always stay at that 4-0 level? How can someone really get their DUPR up?
Yeah, great question. I'll sort of combine that with the sort of secondary question, make sure I touch on how playing unrated players or new users influences you. So I'm going to just switch over to, I'll try to do as much as I can in R, but I'm going to do a little bit of PowerPoint. So Jill, do you see the PowerPoint screen?
I do, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so to answer Charlie's question, just about, basically, do I have to play higher rated players to increase my rating and vice versa? I want to give like a little bit of an overview on just broad level, really general on how exactly, not exactly, on basically the general framework of the algorithm. So what we do to estimate your rating is we estimate basically what we call match specific performance ratings. To do so, we set an expectation for the points you should score. That expectation is based on your rating, your teammates' rating, your opponent's rating. So this figure is just kind of a conceptual figure showing how the algorithm works. So the y-axis shows or represents the percentage of points scored in a result or in a match. And the x-axis represents the difference between either opponents in singles or doubles teams, where on the left-hand side, you're rated much lower than your opponent, and on the right-hand side, you're rated much higher than your opponent. The red line represents this sort of expectation for the percentage of points you should score in a match based on how your rating matches up to your opponents. So if you're rated much, much higher than your opponent, we expect you to score a much higher percentage of points. If you're rated much lower than your opponent, we expect you to score a much lower percentage of points. If you overperform or perform above the red line for that match, you get a match-specific performance that's higher than your rating. And below the line, you get a match-specific performance that's lower than your rating. The point here that's important, though, if we can imagine that 50%, if this is right in the middle of the result, is 0.50, you have sort of equal mathematical opportunity to increase your or decrease your rating, regardless of one, the ratings of you and your teammates, and two, regardless of win-loss. So if your rating is right here and you're a little bit lower rated than your opponent, or excuse me, for Charlie's question, we'll do it up here. So you can be equal rating or higher rating than your opponent, but as long as you exceed this proportion of points scored for the match, you can still increase your rating. So there is ample opportunity, regardless of the rating of your opponent and even your teammate, to increase or decrease your rating. And then one other thing, just to touch on the new users that I wanted to get to, sort of in conjunction with this question, and also, can playing with a lower rated player hurt me or playing against lower rated players hurt me? This is another figure just derived exactly or specifically from our results data. This shows performance against expectation on the y-axis. So 0 would be performing exactly as expected. Above would mean overperformed, below underperformed. And then I've just isolated places where people have played against opponents with only 1, 2, or 3 results. So these instances would be players who before that result had no rating. It's their first result. And this is playing against opponents with 2 and 3 results. The black line in the middle of this box plot represents the mean. And you can see that there's really, things or the performances of players against these players with very low number of results is right at expectation. It's right at 0. And we can take that all the way out to, as this renders, let's see, all the way out to 20. So again, this is performance against expectation from one match against an unrated player all the way out to players with 20 matches. There's very little variation. The mean is right against expectation. So, again, ample opportunity to underperform or overperform, but this is a flat relationship. We're not seeing a trend where the number of results your opponent has or where new users or new opponents are dragging down the performance or the grade that we give players as they're playing against them. Any questions there?
That's super helpful, Mike. I think that one day I will be, with enough practice and diligence, smart enough to understand half of what comes out of your mouth. So I'm going to keep working towards that goal. But it seems like the people in our chat sure are there. And there are a lot of amazing questions. This is a really active community. I just want to say thank you, everyone. Please keep asking questions. It's awesome to engage like this. I love Justin's question, not just because it's one that I can actually answer with a semblance of confidence, but because I think it is a great question. Justin asks, do you consider 2.0 to 5.0 to be your rating and 5.0 above to represent pro players? And Justin, when I was ending my career at Universal Tennis Rating, I didn't want to work in ratings again. So you have to be really careful what you say you don't want to do and what you won't do. But I definitely didn't want to work for a ratings company where the scale had a really large education gap with the customer. So like at UTR, it's 1 through 16. That was really hard when the consumer had been used to 50 years of, X amount of years of NTRP. The beauty of DUPR, as you've kind of already figured out, is 2 through 5 kind of is that standard scale, but then we expanded the scale above 5 to represent the pros. So I think Ben Johns right now is #1 rated in both singles and doubles. He and JW have traded blows before for that #1 spot in singles, and I believe he's at about a 7.3 in singles. So yes, that scale is expanded 5.0 and above for the pro players. That's a great question. One other question we had in the chat about submitting results. While we are building the API, we do have an existing club and event module that anyone can come in and access for 0 upfront costs. You can add your players and you can post scores. You can run events. You can get in touch with us at mydupr.com on the Run Events tab. Just fill out that form and we'll be in touch with you. I'll also leave my personal contact information at the end of this as well. So let's move on to the next question. Man, this is probably the top question that we field is, why does my DUPR change when I don't play? What's a fluid system?
Yeah, great question. One that, like you said, we get all the time. One that I think everybody who works at DUPR thinks about a lot. So in its essence, a fluid system is a system where we are reassessing or regrading your previous match performances as your rating, the rating of your previous teammates, and the ratings of your previous opponents increase in accuracy or become more accurate. I shouldn't put the word increase in there. So I'm going to actually just use a figure to help explain how the fluid system works, because like most of these things, it's easiest to conceptualize when you have something to look at. So so this is just a PowerPoint figure that I made, or PowerPoint slide I made. The panel on the left shows a player's rating last week, and the panel on the right shows a player's rating this week. Raw performance is again just those match-specific performance values. The black line represents their current rating, and then each point again represents a specific result for this user. So this user in what we'll call week 1 on the left panel here only has 2 results. So they have this green triangle, which was about 3.45 raw performance, and this orange triangle, which was about 3.55 raw performance. And you can see that in week 2, they've added a 3rd result. But what's actually happening here is the fluid system is sort of at work between these 2 weeks, adjusting their previous raw performance values as their ratings change, as their teammates' rating change, and their opponent's rating. So notice that this green triangle goes from about 3.45 to actually about 3.6. So we actually went back within that fluid system. We retroactively regraded this player. This is a new user. So this is really important, because you can imagine if a player who has 2 results is playing against somebody with 3 results, there's going to be a little bit of wiggle as their DUPR rating becomes more accurate. So we've actually updated this previous result. In the purple circles, you can see we've updated the orange triangle as well, from about 3.5 something to 3.6. And then we've added a new result in week 2 on the right panel. And you'll notice that their rating jumped up quite a bit, even though we've added only 1 result. And so that's actually us going back, retroactively grading them as their rating becomes more accurate and the ratings of their teammates and opponents. So this fluid system, there are a lot of advantages, one of which is explicitly related to these new users. So the ability to go back and adjust things retroactively with new users who have 2 or 3 or 4 results is really advantageous, as opposed to telling somebody your rating won't get more accurate unless you play 10, 11, 12, 13 matches. You just have to keep playing and your rating will regress to the mean. It also allows us to really just have a ton of connectivity within DUPR users. And so this is happening, for a player that has 30 40, 50, 60 results, you can imagine the amount of adjustments that are happening retroactively in their results history, all of which is just going into making their rating more accurate. And then it also, just from a data management or a data cleaning standpoint, if we fix results data that are incorrect or were entered incorrectly or something like that, their rating and their previous performances and the previous performances of every player who's ever played against that player are just automatically updated within the fluid system. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about the fluid system, so I'll pass it back to Jill.
Thank you, Mike. That was a great explanation. And we actually today sent out a rating survey. And one of the questions to our community is, do you know what a fluid system is? If not, here's what it is, and here's why it has benefits to you as a player in DUPR. Do you A, like it? B, like it now that you understand it better? C, do you not care? Or D, do you feel strongly you don't want your rating to change if you don't play? And I'll be really curious to see what the feedback is. Like I said, we're not perfect. We are listening, and it'll be very fun to see the responses from the community and see if we can continue to build something that resonates with the community. Mike, our next question is, it's a little bit of a leading question, but why does DUPR not count upsets?
Yeah, that is a leading question. So I'm just going to go back to R. So the short answer to that is we do count upsets. So currently, again, just taking our results data and this number down here at the bottom, this is the percentage of our current results currently being included in the rating that are upsets, where a lower rated player beat a higher rated player. So right now, of everybody who's in DUPR, 12% of the matches that we're using to estimate ratings are upsets. I think this question is in regard to the censored upsets, where the difference in ratings between the two teams or between the two singles players is greater than or equal to 0.625. So this is kind of a question that I've thought about a lot, just because it gets answered so much. And I want to start by just highlighting how rare those instances are. So currently, in all of our results data, only 2% of those results are instances where somebody's match is censored because their rating is 0.625, I guess DUPR's different than their opponent. The other kind of thing, or the way that I think about this, is there's no guarantee. I think that people ask about these a lot because they had a big win and they're surprised that their rating didn't go up, or surprised that that match wasn't included in their current rating. But an alternative way to think about this is that you don't need those matches to increase your rating. You don't need those censored 0.625 matches to include your rating. So not only are they really rare, like I said before, there's equal opportunity, regardless of your rating and the ratings of your opponents, to increase or decrease your rating in every single match. So you can increase your rating against lower rated opponents. You can increase your rating against opponents that are rated within the 0.625 threshold. And the reality is, on the player-to-player basis, people tend to remember the instances where they were the lower rated team and they upset a team that was much higher rated than them. But most users have an equal number of these 0.625 matches where they're actually the higher rated team, and you would expect that they performed poorly in that match. So there's no guarantee that including these censored matches would increase your rating. And in fact, often somebody will write in, they'll want to know how that match that was censored would have affected their rating if we didn't have that rule. And sometimes it goes down. Sometimes it goes up by a little bit. Sometimes it goes down by a little bit. Most of the time it barely changes. And that's kind of the reality of this rule. Because we're using up to 60 total matches to estimate a player's rating. And then also, just based on the way that algorithm is written, our algorithm is really sort of buffered against stochasticity. And so it takes sustained periods of increased play to increase your rating. We don't want it to be super subjective to 1 or 2 matches. So just including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these matches, if you have 60 other results included in your rating, isn't going to make that big of a difference. The caveat to that is, if you are good enough, say you upset somebody who is rated 0.625 DUPRs higher than you, if you're good enough to do that consistently, your rating will go up regardless. And then those matches will actually be counted retroactively within the fluid system. So it's not like we throw the matches away and we never use them. We just wait for them to get within the threshold, and then they're included in your rating.
I think that's really the key takeaway that I want our broader player community who has felt like they've suffered negative impacts from this to understand is, well, it's a leading question. It's a misleading question, because we do count those upsets. We do count those results when, as Mike said, your rating falls within that margin and that threshold. So the simple truth is, keep playing, keep performing like that, and sooner rather than later, you will see that result and its meaningful impact.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Mike, the next question is something that I'm personally extremely proud of, even though I did not devise of this. It's our ability to accurately rate players with very limited connectivity to the broader system. So, if unrated players continually play each other, how does DUPR accurately predict their ratings?
Yeah, great question. So rating unrated players is really difficult. But essentially what we're doing is, when we get our first result from a player, we use whatever information that we can to find basically a starting point for that player. So again, if you remember, our rating system is based on that idea of expectation and then performance against expectation. But if we have a new user who has, for which we have no expectations, we need to get those data elsewhere. So we use a combination of anything from the brackets and the event types that they play in, the levels of the players they're playing, other demographic information, to set sort of a starting point with which we can then use to grade that player's performances. It's important to know that that's just a starting point. It's just a way to grade the player initially in 1, 2, 3 matches, et cetera, or just in those first couple of matches. And they're allowed to move about freely. There's no restriction on how much they can move. But it's just a way that we basically train the algorithm about each player, about each unrated player, and sort of give it a starting point with which we can grade their performances. And then each time they're adding a match, we then can fine tune that starting point and fine tune their final rating, and then also use that information to fine tune the ratings of the other unrated players that they're playing against. So again, the fluid system is really what makes this possible, in that we're able to retroactively go back in time and adjust all of this stuff constantly with some of these unrated players. And then once these unrated players, they'll get a provisional rating initially, but once they play against a reliably rated DUPR player, we then have the ability to sort of calibrate them with DUPR and with the system, and there'll be sort of one final adjustment, and then they'll be at a rating, pretty quickly that is, what we'll sort of use as their starting point moving forward. And then I think it's a good time to share this. I have another figure I want to share as well, because these unrated players or these players with very low connectivity are something that I think about all the time. So are we seeing my PowerPoint screen here?
We are, thank you.
Awesome. Oops, wrong one.
This is probably my favorite chart of the presentation. Mike and I debated a few times whether to even go through this rather clandestine information, but I think it's really cool.
Yeah, this is really cool. I was extremely excited to see this. And I actually just reran the analysis this morning to make sure that things were still looking like this. This one's a little bit funky, so I'll walk you through it. Again, this is just a variation in our ability to use DUPR ratings to predict the outcome of matches. And the x-axis is degrees of separation. So this is degrees of separation from our 10 or 15 most accurately rated pro players who are extremely active, extremely connected to other accurately rated players, basically the players in which we have the most confidence in their rating, although we have confidence in the ratings of all our players, which is kind of the point of this figure. So you can see that these are our most accurately, or the players, we'll call them the players for which we have the most information, just the 10, 15 pro players for which we're really sure about. And these over here are players that are, 7 degrees of separation from these most accurately or 10, 15 players for which we have the most information. So by degrees of separation, it's sort of complicated to explain, but basically somebody with 1 degree of separation, these players, this blue point, they've played directly against these 10 to 15 players. The teal players have played against these blue players, but they have not played against these players, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And whereas these players at 7 degrees of separation they're connected to DUPR, but very, very loosely or very loosely connected to these 10 to 15 pro players. The point that I want to make here is that there's a little bit of wiggle in our predictive ability within these categories. But I was pretty amazed to see that these players all the way out here at 7 degrees of separation, we're actually a little bit better at predicting win-loss for them, and I'll explain why. But the point is, even though a new user with very little connectivity, their rating still needs to take a little bit of time to get accurate. When it comes to predicting the outcome of a result, their ratings are still useful. So the ratings are still useful to rate these players relative to other players in this category. And I just thought that was really cool. Yeah. The positive trend is actually just sort of because this metric, degrees of separation, is also correlated or confounded by rating. Mm-hmm. So there's actually more upsets in matches between higher rated players. I think everybody knows that, like, there's a lot of variability in pickleball, and so that's why actually these players generally are lower rated. So our predictive ability is actually a little bit better because there's fewer upsets when in matches where players are maybe rated 2 or 3 or even 4.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. That's super exciting, and it's hot off the press. I love that you ran the numbers one more time this morning just to make sure. Yep. A common thread of a question that I'm seeing in the chat is, it would be, I think Jesse, you articulated this, you said it'd be really nice to understand what results are going into my DUPR. Where do you guys accrue your data? How can I make sure that my matches are going in? The short answer, Jesse, is all of your results should be in DUPR, no matter where they come from. So I want to be really clear on this topic that we are a data and analytics company. And yes, the goal is to accrue as much of this result data as possible globally. Really, the only entity who's putting forth a level of effort in this space is us right now to have that data on a global scale. So we are happy to, for free, take result data from anyone, from any entity. If it's as messy as an Excel spreadsheet, we'll try and work with you to get that cleaned up. If you're sophisticated enough to work with us as we beta our API, happy to work with you there. As I mentioned earlier, there's the completely free DUPR Club and event module where you can also import result data and import your scores. So the simplest answer, Jesse, is we want to be the one-stop shop for all of your match data. And we do that for free. We don't charge organizations. And I would say the inverse of that is true too. If any entity came to us, including competing softwares, and said, I want to use your rating to power my event business or my league business or my ladder business, we would say absolutely. We think of the rating as a very altruistic thing. We think it's something that is absolutely critical in the industry, critical to continue providing good experiences to players so we don't become tennis with extraordinarily poor retention because players aren't having good first-time tournament experiences because it's not level-based unless you're using UTR. So for us, the more entities using the rating, the better for the players and for the organizers. So again, I just want to be really clear on that point that for free, we're happy to take data from anyone, and we're equally happy to share our rating with anyone, including our competitors. Mike, I think it's time for something I'm really excited about. I think you are too, and our audience. We're going to analyze live 3 player performance charts.
All right, let me, I'll just get set up here and share a screen. This is exciting.
This is something that we made publicly available just today, actually, the performance charts for anybody to be able to access.
I did not know that.
Sorry, Mike.
All right. Okay, can you see the Shiny app?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so one user that filled out our survey and wanted us to look at their chart was Jay Zelmer. So this is basically a Shiny app that we built to allow users to literally look at the same exact information that I look at when somebody writes in and asks a question about their rating. And so this chart here, it's what we call your performance chart. And you've seen a version of it in my R console already today, but it shows raw performance, again, match specific performance rating on the y-axis. And then it shows Jay's rating. So I typed in Jay's DUPR ID. It pulls up his name and his current rate, or in their current rating. And then it shows this horizontal black line at Jay's rating. And then all of the results currently being included to estimate Jay's rating. So I do want to point out that if you don't see a result in here, it's not because it's not in DUPR, it's not because it won't be in your DUPR account, but there's a subset of results used to estimate your rating, and that's what's shown here. So these charts are really useful because if somebody writes in and they ask, similar to what Jay asked, was, I feel like I'm better than some of the players that I'm playing against who have a little bit higher rating than me. I can look at Jay's chart and give Jay a little bit of information about his rating. And in this case, I actually see this group of older results that Jay has that look like through time, they're about to fall off. So as Jay accumulates more results, these older results will become not included in the algorithm. And you can see that some of these lowest performances over here are about to just through time and attrition, not be included in Jay's rating. So if Jay keeps performing generally around his rating or around expectation like he is now, then we would actually expect to see his rating come up a little bit. And then the other thing I look for when looking at somebody's rating is, I'll look at just their performances where they're the favorite. So Jay performs pretty well as the favorite. He has some performances above expectation, performances below expectation. And then I'll look for differences between mixed and gender doubles. In this case, Jay's results are distributed pretty well around their rating. And the really only sort of not even anomaly, but thing of note that I see, or that I would respond to Jay if he had written in, is just like, you do have these group of results that are going to fall off soon, and just keep playing like you will, and your rating will probably come up. So I'm going to move to another user.
Yep, I think that's so important, Mike. If you could just talk for a second about and I'm sorry if you said this, and I'm trying to answer chat questions at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Did you talk about what goes into your DUPR, the number of mixed and gendered and singles matches?
Yep. So it's the last 30 mixed and gendered. So you can see, I should have shown this table, sorry. You can see in Jay's table, he has a combination of mixed and gendered performances. So at any time you can have up to 60 results being included in your rating. And there are sort of various parameters for inclusion in the algorithm. One we talked about, which is you need to be within 0.625 DUPRs of your opponent. And then there's also, we also weigh matches by time, by half-life, and a result has to be within certain time period to be included in your DUPR. So it's kind of a combination of several different things, but the most important part is just maybe the parameters for being close to your opponent in rating, and then the last 30 gendered and mixed. So I will pull up Jesse's chart. And it does take a second to update.
I did just send the link for the performance chart in the chat. So if anyone's interested in accessing it post webinar, you'll find it there. Thank you.
Awesome. So Jesse's chart is actually really interesting. So this is something I see sometimes when a user writes in and they just want to know more about their rating. So you'll notice that Jesse generally performs a little bit lower than expected in mixed doubles. So if we isolate her gender doubles, you'll see that Jesse's results are distributed, pretty well around her their rating. And Jesse has some results where they performed above expectation, below expectation, at about 4.22 rating. So these are, again, the types of things that I think make this a really cool and useful tool. Is Jesse can now come in here and say, okay, if I want to increase my rating, maybe I'll focus on trying to perform or figure out ways to perform a little bit better in mixed, because that's clearly where I'm not sort of meeting expectations as per the algorithm. And then we've got one more, Wayne Smith. So again, you're just typing in your DUPR ID up here, and the app is a little bit slow because what it's doing is basically querying our entire results database, which is obviously a really big data set, and then it's isolating the results and designating them as gender and mix, etc. So Wayne's chart is honestly pretty standard, and this is what we're looking for, and this is kind of what we expect to see. So Wayne's rating is 3.69. You can see Wayne's results are distributed pretty evenly above and below their rating, suggesting that Wayne's rating is kind of right in the middle of his raw performance values. I don't see much in the way of clustering above or below the line for mixed versus gender doubles. And the last thing I kind of wanted to show you on these charts, and I'm sorry, I should have spent more time on this results table as it's loading.
Can you use the chart to see with whom you play the best, who your best partner is?
You can, so so what you can do is actually use the results table. So this is Wayne's, again, this is just a table showing the exact same data that are in the chart. And it's just got date, player, teammate, opponent, difference in rating, score of the match, and then the match specific performance rating. So these are the numbers for where those points are plotted above or below your rating. So in this first match, Wayne performed a little bit better than his rating of 3.69, and his match specific performance rating was 3.82, which you can see is 0.13 DUPRs above his current rating. What you can also do is sort of filter by teammate or opponent, and just look at which teammates you play best against, which opponents you play best and worst against, etc. So it's a pretty useful tool, and I think it's like I said, this is what I look at every day when I answer questions about ratings. So we really just want this to be available to players, and I'm actually really excited that it got sent out today. So Jill, I'm sure there may be some questions about the Shiny app.
Well, a question we actually had very early on in the chat that I promised we would address was, why do some of my results, which show in the DUPR app, not show in the shiny app or the performance chart?
Yep. So that's because DUPR is accruing all or as much of your results data as possible, but we still have parameters for inclusion of results in your rating. So they're in there, they're in the results data set I have, but they're just not explicitly used to estimate your rating. It could be because the difference between you and your opponents was greater than 0.625. It could be because you have a full suite of 30 mixed and 30 gendered matches, and some of them are too old to use. It could be that just based on time, they're too old to use. It could be a variety of things, but because we want the rating to be not just as accurate as possible, but to reflect your current skill level, we're not including every single result in your entire match history in your rating, because we want your rating to not fluctuate massively based on one or two matches, but we do want your rating to be flexible enough to move up or down, say after 2 or 3 weeks of sustained or prolonged increase or decrease in your actual skill or play level. So it's kind of a fine line between including as much data as possible and increasing the sample size for every single player as much as possible, but also helping the rating be reactive to actual changes in the skill of a player.
That's super helpful, Mike. Thank you. I think we had a few basic questions that I wanted to address. I know we only have about 3 minutes of time left today. One is, when does the rating update? Brian Levine, I believe you asked that question. The rating updates every Tuesday around noon Central Standard Time. And if you see that you have some new results in, but your rating hasn't updated yet, that's okay. The app is just indexing. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, and you might have caught the app at that critical indexing juncture. And I'm just going to take a look and see if in our last 3 minutes we have any other questions. All right, Mike, let me throw you can I throw you a curveball in our last 60 seconds together?
Sure.
Oh no, we didn't practice this one. Mike, what are some real-time improvements, conversations, struggles? What are you and your team actively working on?
Yeah, great question. So like I said, I'm constantly looking at the predictive ability of DUPR, and Jill and I had a conversation yesterday about just kind of the underlying framework of our algorithm and how we can try to get the predictive ability or predictive power even higher. And I don't want to get too detailed here, but sort of some of the broad ideas I've kicked around are actually one that I've thought about a lot is I showed you that red figure where I just showed sort of conceptually what the linear expectation that we have and that the algorithm uses for the percentage of points you should score based on the rating of you and your opponent. One option and one thing that I've been exploring is either adjusting that linear expectation or using functional forms for that linear expectation, or just sort of fine-tuning and tweak that stuff as we accrue data. So the good thing about the algorithm and some of these questions that come up is I can explicitly look at the data we're collecting and use that to make sure that our algorithm is actually matching the trends and patterns that we see explicitly in our data. And another thing we talk about a lot is just the fluid system and whether or not we're educating users enough about it, whether or not it's maybe too complicated or those sorts of things. I don't think there's a component of the algorithm in the ratings that isn't scrutinized on a weekly basis. I come from academia before this, and the peer review process, the scrutiny I got in that process was much less than the scrutiny I feel like I've got in the last 4 or 5 months working for DUPR. So yeah, we are constantly considering basically every component of the ratings and algorithms. And then the demographic stuff is another one that comes up all the time. Are seniors rated too high or low, mixed versus doubles, that sort of thing. So tweaking the algorithm to make sure that demographics aren't influencing ratings is another thing that, I research all the time.
Thank you, Mike. I want to thank everyone for their time to be on this call, for the tough questions that were asked. I hope everyone enjoys their DUPR performance chart, and thank you so much again. Please feel free to share your feedback.
Thank you.